Dear students, we will today discuss export-oriented growth. In the field of economic growth, we should remember that if we want to increase real national income of a country and real per capita income of a country and want to bring significant changes in quality of life of the people, resources would be required, investable funds would be required. Normally, there are two ways to go for resource mobilization. One is internal resource mobilization, the other is external resource mobilization. Under internal resource mobilization, we have three main sources. One, public savings, two, domestic borrowings, three, deficit financing. Now, when it comes to public savings, we can talk about balance from current revenue, we can talk about additional resource mobilization, and we can talk about surpluses of public enterprises which could generate resources for growth and development. And when we talk about domestic borrowings, loans from public or market borrowings, individual savings, provident fund and related components will come in this category. Then we have deficit financing whenever sources of funds from internal and external sources lag behind requirements of expenditure. The governments normally direct their central banks for long-term loans which they try to supply through pump priming, which is known as additional printing of currency. So, these are the three main sources of domestic resource mobilization. Now, in terms of external resource mobilization, we talk about loans, grants, aids, helps from other countries. We can also talk about loans and aids from world institutions like International Monetary Fund, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, International Development Agencies, and lastly, we can talk about foreign direct investment and FIIs, foreign institutional investors. Now, what I am trying to say is, when we talk about growth, we can have inward oriented policies and outward oriented policies. Inward oriented policies will talk about import substitution, and outward oriented policies will talk about export promotion. So, when we talk about import substitution and export promotion, we are basically talking about international trade. And you will recall, you have read that trade can be termed as an engine of growth, an activity of change, a barometer of progress. Exports are normally seen as crucial growth stimulators. There are instances from countries like Germany, Japan, China, Taiwan, Singapore, Republic of Korea and others which suggest that if a country wants to grow, it should go for export promotion, and through export promotion it should earn foreign exchange, because developing countries are short of foreign exchange. So, if we earn foreign exchange through export surpluses, it can be used for developing infrastructure, developing industries and other potentials of growth. Now, I am not saying that economic growth depends only on revenues earned through export surpluses. Actually, economic growth is a very complex phenomena and it depends on multiplicity of variables. For example, we talk about capital accumulation, whether it is physical capital accumulation or human capital accumulation. We talk about trade, we talk about price fluctuations, political conditions, income distribution in a country, geographical characteristics which also affect growth. You would have seen that the countries which have accessibility to larger resource potentials will grow faster than the countries which have lesser resource potentials, whether it is natural resources, minerals, fertility of soil, vegetations, whatever. So, this way, now let us try to link growth with exports. How exports will lead to growth? Pause here. We will discuss point wise. The first point in favor of export leading to growth is that exports lead to greater capacity utilization by expanding size of market. You have read that size of market depends upon inducement to invest, and inducement to invest depends upon size of aggregate demand, and size of aggregate demand depends upon consumption demand, investment demand, government expenditures, and exports minus imports. The very simple equation you have seen, y is equal to c plus I plus g plus x minus m. X minus m is where exports and imports come into picture. So if countries start exporting, they have larger market to supply, and if they have larger market to supply, inducement to invest in domestic economy will rise. Even if you have shortage of aggregate demand domestically because of low incomes in the country, this lack of aggregate demand domestically can be compensated by extra demand which you can create in the export sector, that is by trading to other countries. Yes, other countries' levels of income, their import elasticities, etc. will also determine whether they will be in a position to import from us or not, but we can go for export promotion by searching new markets, by thinking of new products, and by supplying these products at competitive rates to these countries. Secondly, we have to also keep in mind that if exports are promoted, it will lead to externalities. You can think of comparative cost advantages. You can think of international specialization. You can think of larger productivity of labor. Higher productivity of labor would be a right word to say that. So this way, if externalities are arising, this will also help developing countries to grow. Thirdly, there is a term which is known as learning by doing. So whenever we come into contact of external markets, we learn many things. We learn new technologies, we learn new methods of production. There is dissemination of knowledge and technique. This helps developing countries to practice these new techniques in their own market also. So this is also an advantage which we can think of by export promotion. More importantly, when it comes to scarcity of foreign exchange, you are aware that developing countries have very less potential for export promotion. The advantage of export promotion would also be seen in terms of larger earnings in terms of foreign exchange. We know very well that exports earn foreign exchange for us. Developing countries have scarcity of foreign exchange because their demands for imports are more than their potentials to export. Now, if we want to know why developing countries have more demand for imports, we can divide developing countries' imports into three categories. One are developmental imports like capital, technology, raw material, machinery. These are all developmental oriented imports. Then we have maintenance imports, which are the result of the first type of imports, which are developmental imports. Since we have imported machineries, so if there is wear and tear in the machinery, we have to import parts, sub-parts, because we are not making them. So maintenance imports are the direct result of developmental imports. And thirdly, we have consumption imports. Many a time, you might have seen India's experience. Many a time we have been importing food grains, edible oil, fertilizers, even potatoes and onions we have been importing. So if there is non-availability of consumption items domestically, for consumption purposes we are forced to import. This is known as consumption imports. Now please tell me, where is the possibility of import cuts? Can you go for import cuts in development? Where is the possibility of cutting down imports? Because if you make a cut in developmental imports, the whole exercise of growth is compromised. If we make cuts in maintenance imports, the machinery which you have imported will sit idle. It's just like this, that you have imported Boeing 747 from outside. There is some problem with this Boeing 747s. It is sitting at the airport. Unless you import parts and subparts of Boeing from Boeing company, it will not fly. So would you like your Boeings to sit down in the airport and do nothing for you? Similarly, machines placed in All India Institute of Medical Sciences, which are imported from outside, will sit idle if there is capital depreciation in those machines, and they will force you to import maintenance imports. And finally, if you do not import onions, have you seen the governments have gone on onion prices, and people will not see the reason that the crop has been destroyed or the supply is less. They only want that government should supply basic essentials to them at reasonable prices all the time. So keeping this conditioning of the government in mind, I don't think there is any possibility of import cuts. That is why economists suggest that import cut is not the inward oriented policy. The inward oriented policy is import substitution. That is, you try to produce those goods which you have been importing from outside up till now by yourself. It can also be termed as standing on your own foot, reducing your dependencies on others. But it will all depend upon geographical characteristics and resource availability also. Many a time we want to stand on our own feet, but compulsions are such that we have to depend upon outside world. And I don't think any country has developed or grown by itself. All countries, the so-called developed countries of today, have also been dependent on rest of the world in their initial stages of growth and development. So there is no problem if we go for outward oriented policy. Exports will help us earning foreign exchange. This foreign exchange can be used for developmental imports, maintenance imports and consumption imports. This can also be used for buying machinery from outside for your EOUs, export oriented units. It will help increasing your export potential tomorrow. Therefore, if you depend on exports and if you earn sufficient foreign exchange through your exports, there is a possibility that countries will grow faster. This is what I am saying. So, exports increase supply potential of an economy through supply of goods from outside to the domestic economy. In nutshell, what we are trying to say is exports will lead to externalities, export will lead to increased factor productivity, exports will lead to price competitiveness, quality consciousness in domestic economy, which are important for growth. Therefore, export-led growth will try to signify the importance of exports in the overall policy framework, which is known as trade policy framework. World trade markets allow producers to get commodities which are quality commodities and quality equipments at lesser price at a faster pace from the rest of the world, which increases their import capacities also. Now let us see whether this model, which is also known as export growth model leading to growth, has actually been beneficial for developing countries. There are two sides to it. Some economists agree that yes, exports are crucial growth stimulators. There is other flip side to this also, which says that exports may not be the crucial growth stimulators, because the case studies of different countries have shown that outward oriented policies has led to disaster results also. There is no direct causality that exports will lead to growth. They have seen that if we look at terms of trade, most of the time developing countries are facing adverse terms of trade, and their exports are not in a position to buy sufficient quantity of imports, because most of the time the exports of developing countries will be export of primary products, and internationally the prices of primary products have not risen that much as prices of industrial manufacturers have risen. So even if we supply larger quantum of exports, we go for larger shipment of exports, they will buy very few imports for us. It will earn very few foreign exchange for us, and it may lead to distortions in domestic economy, because if we are emphasizing all the time for export promotion, then we are not catering to domestic demand. So there is also a possibility of shortage in domestic supply at the cost of supply to external markets. Well, external markets will become the first priority then for the producers, especially by the export oriented units, and domestic markets will be the least priority or second priority. So it may lead to non-availability of goods in the domestic market at the cost of supply to international markets. It may also lead to inflationary pressures because of short supply, which may lead to adverse balance of payment situation, for which you are trying to use exports as a potential. You are saying that exports will lead to ease in your balance of payment crisis because your demand for foreign exchange is more and supply of foreign exchange is less. Exports will help increasing supply of foreign exchange in the domestic country, but it may lead to quite reverse result. You might have burnt your fingers by supplying to the outside market, but not getting sufficient foreign exchange into the domestic market. In the growth theory, there is also a model known as the Virtuous circle model of export-led growth. It's a very simple cumulative model driven by exports as the major component of autonomous demand. It can be outlined as under: output growth is a function of export growth. Export growth itself is a function of price competitiveness and foreign income growth. And price competitiveness is a function of wage growth and productivity growth. And productivity growth is a function of output growth, the so-called Verdun law. This law also explains that exports are useful and stimulators to growth. So today what we are trying to conclude is the countries for raising the growth rates should either go for inward oriented policies or should go for outward oriented policies. Which is better, inward oriented policy or outward oriented policy? I told you in the beginning that inward oriented policy will emphasize on import substitution, producing goods and services domestically and meeting domestic demand. The outward oriented policies will think of export promotion, and through export promotion earning sufficient foreign exchange, reaping the benefits of external economies, reaping the benefits of learning from others, and then practicing these things in the domestic economy. If we look at conclusion, we will say that the mixture has to be there. You alone cannot have exports leading to growth. There has to be a mix of inward oriented policies and outward oriented policies, which I think will be a better policy option for developing country. Mere thinking of exports without thinking of domestic economies will not be possible, because exports also originate from the domestic economy. If you are not increasing the strength of the domestic economy, how can you increase exports? Because exports, after all, are the result of export surpluses, and export surpluses are nothing but total production domestically minus domestic consumption. So if domestic consumptions are high, total production domestically is less, where from we are going to have export surpluses, and where from we are going to have export promotion as a engine for growth. So what is required is to strengthen domestic economy first, and then thinking in terms of exports. If you are strong within, you are strong outside. If you are weak within, you will be weak outside also. So therefore, a harmony, a balance between import substitution and export promotion should be the right policy measure.